What if everything you thought you knew about Mary, the mother of Jesus, was only a fragment of the real story? Imagine discovering that her true origin is not only far older than Bethlehem, but intricately woven into the rise and fall of ancient civilizations, guarded in secrecy for thousands of years. Edgar Cayce, the man often called the sleeping prophet, claimed to have uncovered a hidden truth so powerful that it could reshape the way you see faith, Christ, and the very foundations of spiritual history. Has this ever happened to you? When something you've always believed suddenly reveals a deeper, unexpected layer? Stay with me until the end. What you're about to discover might surprise you. For over 100 years, this revelation has been veiled, protected from the public eye, tucked away in whispers and fragments. Cayce's visions describe Mary not as a simple woman chosen at random, but as part of a divine plan that began long before the Gospels were written. A plan that traces her spiritual lineage through civilizations long forgotten, an unbroken chain of purity, purpose, and cosmic design. She wasn't just a figure in a story. She was the living embodiment of a mission conceived in the higher realms, a mission so vital that it spanned eras, continents, and countless generations. But before we begin, please hit the like button and let me know where in the world you're watching from today. It's always fascinating seeing who's joining us from around the world. Traditional religion, over centuries, chose to preserve Mary's image in the simplest terms: an ordinary woman elevated by divine grace, obedient and pure. Yet, in doing so, it avoided peeling back the layers of her true spiritual history. Cayce's accounts challenged that narrative head-on. In his view, Mary's role was not decided in the quiet town of Nazareth, nor in the moment of the angel's visitation. It was set into motion long before human history as we know it, before the formation of the biblical nations, before written language even captured the first sacred tales. Imagine a time when spiritual lineages were fiercely protected, when certain souls were nurtured in secrecy to safeguard their mission against the corruption of the world. Cayce claimed Mary's soul was one of these, a rare, luminous presence, born not from the ordinary cycle of human incarnations, but from a lineage cultivated for a single, extraordinary purpose: to receive and transmit the purest form of divine energy the world had ever known. The implications of this are profound. If true, it means Mary's life was not simply a matter of divine selection in a single moment. It was the culmination of an ancient cosmic strategy. It suggests that the coming of Christ was not an isolated miracle, but the final chapter in a carefully orchestrated sequence of events, stretching back into the mists of forgotten ages. Has this ever happened to you? Hearing a story you thought you understood, only to realize that what you knew was just the surface. If the Gospels are the visible thread, Cayce's visions claim to reveal the hidden tapestry beneath, a tapestry where Mary is more than a symbol of obedience. She becomes the guardian of a sacred code, a living bridge between lost civilizations and the dawn of Christianity. And yet, here's the most intriguing part. The official accounts remain silent on these origins, as though deliberately leaving out the chapters that would change everything. Why? Was humanity not ready to hear it, or was there a deeper reason for keeping this knowledge veiled until a time when its impact could awaken more hearts than divide them? Stay with me, because in the next part, we'll step beyond the familiar pages of Scripture and into the ancient corridors of hidden history, where Mary's story begins long before Bethlehem, and where the first clues to her extraordinary destiny were planted. If you enjoy exploring these hidden stories with me, make sure you're subscribed so we can keep uncovering them together. Cayce described Mary's mission as something that did not simply appear out of nowhere, but as the result of a process that began long before human memory could record it. In his visions, her soul was not part of the ordinary cycle of birth and rebirth. It had been chosen, shaped, and refined across ages, existing beyond the timeline of kingdoms, empires, or even the first biblical nations. This wasn't a random choice. It was the unfolding of a hidden truth that had been guarded for centuries, a truth that carried the potential to impact the entire spiritual journey of humanity. According to Cayce, Mary came from a spiritual lineage unlike any other, not just a family tree of names and generations, but a chain of souls who had preserved something far greater than wealth or power, an unbroken purity, both in body and in energy. This purity wasn't about perfection in the way we often imagine it. It was about remaining aligned with a divine purpose, resisting the distortions of a world that often bends truth to its will. Such a lineage was cultivated in secrecy, shielded from the corrupting influences of the outside world, protected by communities who understood its role in a far-reaching cosmic design. He spoke of this heritage as a kind of invisible current flowing through time, subtle yet powerful. Mary's essence, shaped within it, was like a vessel designed to receive and channel the Messiah's energy in its most complete form. And it is here that the story takes on a dimension most people have never considered. She was not only chosen for her virtues, but because she was the bearer of a millennia-old sacred code. This code, according to Cayce, wasn't written on stone or parchment. It was carried in her very being, in the frequency of her spirit, in the way her presence could hold and transmit a light that nothing could extinguish. It's this idea that elevates Mary beyond the image of any queen, prophetess, or revered figure in Scripture. While kings fought over land and power, she carried within her a treasure that could not be taken by force, a treasure meant to open the way for the greatest spiritual transformation the world would ever see. Imagine the mindset required to live such a destiny, the decisions that had to be made in silence, the quiet strength to hold on to something so immense without ever revealing its full weight to those around her. What fascinates me is how this perspective changes everything we think we know. It turns Mary's life into a carefully orchestrated journey, one that moves behind the scenes of history, hidden in plain sight. Each step in her path, each person she encountered, each moment of preparation was part of a greater alignment, a precise sequence that had been set into motion long before her birth. And when we begin to see her story through this lens, it is no longer just about one woman in one moment of time. It becomes a living example of how the divine can weave its plans through generations, shaping the right person for the right moment. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic, into the spaces where ancient prophecy, spiritual discipline, and the unseen architecture of destiny converge to reveal why Mary's presence in history could never have been an accident, and why the energy she carried continues to resonate far beyond the pages of Scripture. Write in the comments, "This makes sense to me." When we look at the Gospels, there's a striking silence about Mary's early life. It's almost as if her story begins abruptly, without the background that might explain why she stood apart from every other woman of her time. Edgar Cayce believed this absence wasn't an oversight. It was a deliberate veil, drawn to protect a truth too powerful to be revealed before the world was ready to understand it. There is something fascinating about the idea that her beginnings were hidden, not erased, waiting like a sealed letter whose time for opening had not yet come. Cayce's visions suggest that to truly understand who Christ was, we have to understand the vessel through which he entered the world. Mary's selection wasn't simply a reward for a life of virtue or obedience. It was the fulfillment of a design woven through ages, one that embedded in her very being the capacity to receive and sustain a force unlike anything humanity had known. She carried within her what Cayce called unique spiritual codes, patterns of light and energy, written into her soul long before she ever drew her first breath on earth. These codes, he claimed, were not symbolic. They were as real as the laws that govern the stars, imprinted across thousands of years and multiple lifetimes. They were the result of preparation that spanned civilizations, each step preserving something essential for the moment she would be called to embody the divine. It's a hidden truth that challenges the way we usually think about destiny, because it suggests that her role was not the result of chance or a last-minute divine decision, but the conclusion of an ancient and deliberate sequence. Imagine the impact of this perspective. It shifts the entire narrative from a single miraculous event to a cosmic plan in motion for millennia. It reveals a behind-the-scenes process where every detail mattered, where certain decisions, alliances, and even entire cultures played their part in shaping her essence, her birth, her upbringing, her temperament, Nothing was random. And this is perhaps the most extraordinary part. She lived her early years in a way that outwardly seemed unremarkable, while within her, an invisible architecture of purpose was being activated. Religion, as we know it, often sidesteps this link, keeping the focus on the visible events. By doing so, it inadvertently leaves out the thread that connects the coming of Christ to a far-reaching cosmic framework. That omission means we lose sight of the magnitude of what was unfolding, how a divine plan moved through centuries, preserving its most precious element until the right moment. It's like seeing only the final scene of a story, without understanding the intricate journey that led there. Subscribe and stay with me on this journey. We've got so much more to discover, and when you start to think about it in those terms, it changes your mindset entirely. It makes you wonder how many other lives, how many other quiet, unassuming beginnings are part of designs we can't yet see. It invites a transformation in how we view our own existence, pushing us to consider that perhaps the greatest missions are not announced with fanfare, but prepared in silence, written into the soul long before they are revealed to the world. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic, because these spiritual codes Cayce spoke of were more than abstract ideas. They were the living connection between ancient knowledge, sacred energy, and the arrival of a figure who would alter the course of humanity. Write in the comments, "I see the bigger picture." Cayce described Mary's ancestry as something far more guarded than any royal bloodline. Her lineage, he said, was surrounded by an invisible wall of protection, built and maintained by communities who understood that their mission went far beyond their own lifetimes. These were not ordinary groups. They lived apart from the rest of the world, often in isolation, not out of fear, but out of purpose. They followed precise rituals, codes of conduct, and disciplines designed to preserve not only the purity of the bloodline, but the integrity of the spiritual energy flowing through it. This was a long-term commitment that demanded sacrifice, and those who participated knew they were preserving a seed meant to blossom in a specific moment in history. The idea of such protection changes the way we think about Mary's early life. It wasn't just about shielding her from moral or physical harm, it was about creating the right energetic environment so that the unique qualities of her soul could remain untouched by the distortions of the world. Cayce spoke of purity in a way that went beyond the surface. It wasn't about perfection in behavior alone, but about maintaining alignment with a divine purpose, resisting influences that could weaken or fragment that alignment. That's why these guardians were so careful. They understood that even a slight deviation could alter the outcome of a plan centuries in the making. This perspective challenges the official narrative of Christian history, which tends to present Mary's arrival as sudden, almost accidental in its timing. In Cayce's vision, it was anything but accidental. Her appearance in history was the culmination of a long, deliberate process, a process that required precision, patience, and a kind of collective faith strong enough to survive through generations. When we see it this way, the story of Mary becomes a story of continuity, a thread that stretches back into the shadows of human history, connecting moments and peoples who may never have known the full scope of what they were part of. And that raises a profound question Cayce often hinted at. If Mary's life was shaped by such a lineage and mission, how many others might be walking among us with equally hidden purposes? How many lives, outwardly ordinary, are in fact carrying silent but decisive roles in a plan much larger than we can perceive? It's a thought that shifts our mindset, completely urging us to look beyond appearances and consider that perhaps the most impactful transformations happen far from the spotlight, in the quiet persistence of those who are simply fulfilling what they were born to do. Mary's story in this light becomes an invitation. It calls us to search for truth beyond the boundaries of written scripture, to seek the hidden currents that run beneath the surface of recorded history. It's a reminder that history, as we receive it, is often a carefully chosen selection of events and explanations, while behind the scenes, entire chapters remain unwritten, guarded, and waiting for those willing to look deeper. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic, exploring how these secret guardians operated, the vows they took, and the subtle ways they influenced the course of events without ever stepping into the foreground of history. Write in the comments, "I believe there's more to the story." Cayce often described his visions as stepping into a vast, living archive where the past, present, and future existed side by side, a place he called the Akashic records. In that space, time did not flow as we know it. Instead, events were connected like threads in a single tapestry, each influencing and shaping the others. He could follow these threads across centuries, watching how decisions, alliances, and even small, seemingly insignificant moments in history were part of a larger orchestration. It was within this realm that he first encountered the story of Mary not as a young woman in Nazareth, but as a soul on a journey that spanned civilizations and lifetimes. In one of his most vivid experiences, Cayce saw an unfamiliar temple bathed in a golden light that seemed to radiate from another dimension entirely. Its architecture did not match anything found in known history. Columns carved with symbols that felt both alien and ancient, surrounded by gardens so lush and vibrant they seemed to hum with life. At the temple's heart, a group of figures dressed in white performed a silent ritual. They moved with a precision that suggested the act had been repeated for generations, and at the center of this sacred gathering, a child was presented. That child, Cayce understood, was Mary's soul in one of her earliest known incarnations, being entrusted with an ancient promise that would take lifetimes to fulfill. This vision revealed something extraordinary. Her preparation did not begin with her birth into the world we know. It had started long before, in times that have vanished from recorded memory. Through each of these incarnations, she was shaped, refined, and infused with knowledge that was not only spiritual but deeply practical. Wisdom about how to protect the sacred from corruption, how to preserve clarity of purpose in the midst of chaos, and how to keep her inner light unshaken, regardless of external pressures. Don't miss the next chapter of these revelations. Hit subscribe, and let's keep going. Cayce described an energy field surrounding her, a luminous shield that repelled darkness as naturally as the sun disperses shadows. This was not a passive protection, but something alive, fed by teachings she had absorbed in past lives spent among advanced spiritual communities. It was as if each lifetime had added another layer of resilience, another refinement of the sacred frequency she carried. And in these lifetimes, she wasn't simply a passive recipient of wisdom. She was an active participant in traditions that predated written history, learning from those who themselves were keepers of truths stretching back to humanity's earliest dawn. The mindset required to maintain such purity over multiple incarnations is almost beyond comprehension. Every lifetime brought its own temptations, its own challenges, its own opportunities to deviate from the path, and yet Cayce's visions showed her consistently making the decisions that kept her aligned with the original promise made. In that golden-lit temple, that alignment, more than anything else, is what made her the ideal vessel for the mission she would one day fulfill. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic, exploring how these past life experiences connected Mary to ancient civilizations whose wisdom and rituals became the very foundation of her spiritual strength. Write in the comments, "I believe in the unseen path." Cayce's visions showed Mary's preparation as a rich tapestry woven from the wisdom of multiple worlds. From the Essenes, she inherited the discipline of ritual purity, the quiet resilience of a community that lived apart from the noise of society, guarding spiritual truths with a devotion that shaped every breath they took. From Atlantis, she carried the memory of advanced spiritual science, a profound understanding of energy, vibration, and the subtle laws that link the human soul to the fabric of the cosmos. And from ancient Egypt, she absorbed the mysteries of sacred symbolism, the precision of priestly rites, and the deep connection between the physical and the divine. This fusion of traditions, each from a civilization that had mastered a unique aspect of spiritual knowledge, created a foundation unlike anything found in the history books. It was this combination that uniquely equipped her to fulfill a mission that demanded not just faith, but mastery over the unseen. What stood out most in Cayce's accounts was his redefinition of purity. It wasn't the fragile, untouchable image often painted by religious tradition. It was something far more resilient and practical, a steadfast fidelity to divine purpose, even when surrounded by trials, temptation, or uncertainty. Purity, in this sense, was about choosing alignment over and over again, no matter the circumstances. Mary's strength was not in being untouched by life, but in engaging with it, without ever losing the thread that connected her to the divine plan. That was the true measure of her preparation. The capacity to walk through the complexity of human experience without allowing it to fracture her core purpose. Cayce understood that revealing this perspective could shake the foundations of belief for many. A Mary shaped by countless lifetimes, trained in the spiritual legacies of lost civilizations, was a far cry from the simple, unexamined figure many had been taught to imagine. This was not a figure defined solely by humility and obedience, but by an extraordinary spiritual strategy, executed across centuries. It was the kind of hidden truth that could inspire transformation for some, yet trigger resistance in others who preferred the safety of familiar narratives. For this reason, Cayce recorded every vision with meticulous care, aware that timing would be everything. He preserved details in a way that future generations could uncover them when the collective mindset was ready to receive such revelations. He knew that this knowledge, if released too soon, might be met with dismissal or fear rather than curiosity and reflection. But in the right moment, it could invite a deeper understanding, not just of Mary's role, but of the way the divine works behind the scenes to prepare a soul for its highest calling. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic, exploring how the traces of this ancient fusion of knowledge still echo in Mary's life story, hidden in plain sight within art, symbols, and traditions that have survived into our time. Write in the comments, I can see the hidden connections. Cayce's visions portrayed Mary's journey as something vast, unfolding across multiple lifetimes and woven into the very fabric of human history. Each incarnation added another layer of refinement, like a sculptor patiently shaping the same masterpiece over ages. The universe itself seemed to participate in this process, aligning circumstances, encounters, and opportunities for growth so that her soul could evolve into exactly what was required for her ultimate role. It wasn't a path free from challenge. Far from it. The real transformation came from navigating trials and decisions that tested her commitment to the original purpose set for her long before she was known to the world. Her lineage was just as carefully maintained. For millennia, it was preserved with an almost surgical precision, its spiritual purity shielded by those who understood that what they protected went far beyond heritage. These were guardians of a connection, not merely a family name. They knew they were safeguarding a living channel through which something extraordinary would one day flow. This wasn't superstition. It was a conscious commitment, rooted in the understanding that certain energies, once diluted, could never be restored. And so generation after generation, they carried the weight of this task quietly, often without fully knowing the details of the destiny it would one day fulfill. Threaded through this lineage was the echo of ancient prophecies, whispers carried, across cultures and centuries, about a woman of unmatched purity who would act as a bridge between the divine and the earthly. In Egyptian traditions, she appeared as a luminous mother figure, often symbolized by the lotus or the star, representing a vessel untouched by corruption. In Hebrew traditions, she emerged in the writings and oral histories as the mother of the Redeemer, foreseen long before the events of Bethlehem. Different civilizations gave her different names and symbols, yet the essence was always the same. She would be the one capable of holding the purest light without it being diminished by the world. If this perspective opened something new for you, subscribe and let's keep exploring side by side. What's remarkable is how these archetypes persisted even when the cultures themselves changed or fell. Symbols etched into temple walls, preserved in sacred texts, and embedded in ritual practices all carried fragments of the same story. For those with eyes to see, these signs were like a trail of clues left behind, waiting for someone to connect them. Cayce believed Mary's soul carried an unbroken awareness of this archetype, not as vanity or self-importance, but as a compass that kept her aligned with her role, despite the distractions and distortions of each age. This broader perspective reframes her story entirely. She becomes not just a figure of devotion, but the living culmination of an intentional cosmic process that spanned civilizations. Her life wasn't an isolated miracle. It was the flowering of seeds planted in eras long before her final incarnation. And when we see it this way, we begin to grasp the scale of the plan, one in which every detail, every choice, and every act of preservation was part of something far larger than any single moment in history. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic, following the threads of these prophecies and the ways they silently shaped the world around her, influencing decisions and events in ways most people never realized. Write in the comments, "I can follow the thread." Cayce often described Mary's arrival into history as the blooming of a seed that had been sheltered through storms, wars, and the rise and fall of civilizations. It was never left unguarded. Around her lineage, an invisible fortress had been built, layers of energy fields maintained through carefully preserved rituals and guarded teachings. These weren't empty ceremonies performed out of tradition alone. They were intentional acts, designed to shield the essence of a mission that could not be contaminated by the instability and corruption of the outside world. Those who participated in this safeguarding may not have known every detail of the plan, but they felt the weight of its importance. Each prayer, each vow, each moment of discipline was part of a larger choreography that spanned centuries. This spiritual heritage didn't just protect her, it shaped her. It made her attuned to the smallest whispers of divine guidance, able to sense when to act and when to wait, when to step forward and when to remain hidden. That sensitivity was not a natural accident, but the result of generations of cultivation, a kind of inner tuning that kept her aligned with something far greater than herself. And when trials came, as they inevitably would, this same heritage gave her the strength to stand unshaken. She could endure not because life was easy, but because her spirit carried the memory of countless preparations, the residue of every lesson preserved in her bloodline. Cayce spoke of a celestial code embedded within her, a unique pattern that no other human being possessed. It wasn't written in her DNA in the way we understand genetics today. It was more like a spiritual signature, an imprint that made her the only possible vessel for the mission ahead. This code was not merely symbolic. It was the energetic blueprint that allowed her to hold the magnitude of divine energy that would one day flow through her without being consumed by it. Without this, the incarnation of Christ in the form we know would have been impossible. And yet, while Joseph's genealogy is presented in detail within Scripture, Mary's is left shrouded in silence. To most, this might seem like an omission or a historical oversight, but Cayce saw it as a deliberate act of protection. To reveal her ancestry in full would have been to expose the very lineage that had been so carefully guarded, risking its distortion or destruction by political and religious forces that could not comprehend its true significance. It was as if the most important book in the library had been hidden behind a false wall, visible only to those who already knew where to look. This intentional obscurity speaks volumes about the mindset of those who safeguarded her story. They understood that timing was everything, and that revealing a truth before the world was ready could cause more harm than good. By veiling her origins, they ensured that the seed could grow to its destined moment without interference. And in that choice, they preserved not just her safety, but the unfolding of a plan written far beyond the pages of history. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic, exploring how this deliberate concealment of Mary's true lineage mirrors other ancient strategies of protection found across different cultures and eras. Write in the comments, "The seed was always protected." Cayce described Mary's lineage as the silent architecture upon which the mission of Jesus was built, an invisible foundation without which the entire structure of the story would collapse. It was not simply a matter of ancestry or inherited traits. It was the carrying of a sacred continuity, a living thread that bound the arrival of Christ to a cosmic preparation stretching back to civilizations long buried under the sands of time. To grasp this changes everything. It transforms the familiar narrative into something far more intricate, revealing a history that moves behind the scenes, untouched by the shifting winds of politics or dogma. Her journey was not limited to a single lifetime. Cayce traced her soul across the ancient world, in and out of eras that modern history barely remembers. In Atlantis, she was part of a priesthood devoted to preserving the highest spiritual sciences, a blend of wisdom and energy mastery that saw the divine not as something distant, but as a force that could be harmonized with the human experience. That knowledge did not vanish with the fall of Atlantis. It traveled with her spirit, becoming part of her internal compass, a guide that would influence every choice in the lifetimes that followed. In Egypt, her role took on a different form. She became a guardian within temples where sacred knowledge was not only preserved, but actively protected from those who would twist it for power. Here, she refined the art of working with energy in precise and deliberate ways, rituals that could heal, purify, and fortify the spirit against forces that sought to corrupt it. These practices demanded discipline, focus, and an unshakable sense of responsibility. Even though the memories of those lives would not be fully conscious in her final incarnation, the essence of that training remained, ready to be awakened when needed. Among the Essenes, she immersed herself in a life of spiritual purity and deliberate separation from worldly distractions. Their communities were built on the mindset that to carry out a divine mission, one had to remain in constant alignment with higher laws. In that environment, she learned the importance of rhythm, prayers timed with the cycles of nature, rituals in harmony with celestial movements, and a daily life structured to keep the mind clear and the heart open. It was here that the fragments of Atlantis and Egypt found a bridge into the traditions that would meet her in her final years before the Annunciation. These lifetimes were not random chapters scattered across time. They were a carefully woven journey, each phase refining a different aspect of her being. From Atlantis came the mastery of universal laws, from Egypt the protection of sacred truths, and from the Essenes the discipline to live in unwavering alignment with the divine. Together, they formed the perfect preparation for the most demanding role a soul could carry. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic, tracing how these ancient legacies subtly resurfaced in Mary's final life, influencing her presence, her decisions, and the unseen ways she shaped the path for what was to come. Write in the comments, the past is never lost. Within the Essene communities, Mary's life took on the rhythm of disciplined seclusion. These were not cloisters of inactivity, but living sanctuaries where every act, from the preparation of food to the recitation of prayers, was infused with intention. The Essenes understood that purity was not something attained once and then kept effortlessly. It was a constant choice, reinforced through daily practice. Mary's time among them refined her capacity to remain steady in the face of spiritual pressures, to maintain her inner clarity even when the world beyond their walls was restless, unpredictable, and often hostile to truths it could not understand. In that environment, she learned how to anchor herself so deeply to the divine that no storm could unseat her. And yet, her story was already being told long before her birth. In temples and sacred spaces across different lands, images appeared of a luminous woman holding a child, the light around them rendered in gold, in stars, in delicate beams carved into stone. Cayce recognized these depictions as visual prophecies, the work of artists and priests who may not have known her name but understood the archetype she embodied. These works were not mere decoration, they were deliberate markers, signals left for those with the eyes to see, carrying forward the expectation of a figure who would unite heaven and earth through the life she would bring into the world. Mary became, in Cayce's vision, the living bridge between civilizations and ages. She was not bound to a single culture, people, or tradition. Instead, she was the convergence point where the ancient wisdom of Atlantis, the sacred sciences of Egypt, the disciplined spirituality of the Essenes, and the unfolding revelation of Christianity met in a single life. Through her, these threads were not simply preserved, they were transformed, integrated into a living expression of the divine plan that transcended the limits of any one era or belief system. Her presence signaled continuity and transformation at once. Continuity because she carried forward the essence of teachings older than recorded history. Transformation because those teachings, through her, would take on a new form, one that could resonate with the world of her time and beyond. This is why her life cannot be reduced to a single role or title. She was not only the mother of Jesus, she was the custodian of an inheritance that belonged to all humanity, an embodiment of a vision that had been nurtured through countless generations and guarded by those who understood its cosmic importance. In seeing her this way, the boundaries between myth, history, and faith blur. She becomes more than a figure in Scripture. She becomes a point of connection between what has been and what is yet to come. Through her, the divine plan did not just touch the earth, it wove itself into the very story of humanity's spiritual evolution. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic, uncovering how these prophetic symbols and ancient legacies continued to surface subtly in Mary's final life, influencing not only her path, but the very environment into which Christ would be born. Write in the comments, "The bridge has always been there." Cayce's accounts reveal that Mary's story did not simply begin with a miracle in Nazareth. It began in realms beyond the limits of time. He spoke of a cosmic council, a gathering of luminous beings whose presence radiated purpose, discussing the destiny of humanity and the need for a vessel pure enough to receive and carry a consciousness unlike any other. This was not a random meeting, but a decisive moment in the architecture of the divine plan. The decision was made with precision. The soul that would one day be known as Mary would be prepared and protected, her path carefully aligned so that nothing could distort the role she was meant to fulfill. Her parents, Joachim and Anne, were not chosen by chance. Their own lineages, lives, and inner qualities carried frequencies that harmonized perfectly with the mission. Cayce described this compatibility not in mere genetic terms but as a resonance, an alignment of heart, mind, and spirit that would create the right environment for Mary's early formation. Even without knowing the full magnitude of their role, they lived in a way that made them worthy of it. Their home was a sanctuary of faith, devotion, and a quiet strength that would nurture a soul destined to change history. The moment of her birth was marked by signs that would be remembered and whispered about for years. Unusually bright stars appeared in the night sky, as if the heavens themselves were announcing her arrival. Natural phenomena, subtle shifts in wind, the sudden stillness of animals, an atmosphere that seemed charged with something unseen, were noted by those attuned to the rhythms of the earth. For some, these were omens. For others, blessings. To those with deeper understanding, they were confirmations that the awaited moment had arrived. Even her name carried a meaning that went far beyond family choice. Mary, she who carries the light, was both a title and a prophecy. In ancient traditions, names were not just identifiers. They were vibrations that shaped destiny. To carry such a name meant to embody its essence. In her case, it symbolized her role as the bearer of an energy that would illuminate the world, a light that could not be extinguished. Every aspect of her arrival, from the chosen family to the celestial alignments to the very sound of her name, was part of a meticulous preparation that spanned both the physical and spiritual realms. This awareness reframes her existence as the unfolding of a pattern too intricate to be dismissed as coincidence. The setting of her birth was not just a backdrop, but an integral part of her mission. The signs, the symbols, the choices made by those around her, all of it was in harmony with the greater design, a design that had been whispered about in prophecy and preserved in the hearts of those who understood the hidden currents of history. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic, exploring how her earliest years, shaped within this field of meaning and intention, became the foundation for the unshakable presence she carried into the defining moments of her life. Write in the comments, "The light was always with her." Mary's life, as Cayce described it, was not simply guided. It was orchestrated with the kind of precision that leaves no room for coincidence. Every detail, from the environment she was born into to the people entrusted with her care, was part of a deliberate design to preserve her role as the pure channel for the Messiah. This precision wasn't about control, it was about alignment, ensuring that her surroundings, her upbringing, and even the subtleties of her daily life would nourish the mission that had been set for her long before she took her first breath. From her earliest years, she was immersed in the unique atmosphere of the Essene community, a place where every moment was infused with spiritual intention. Life among the Essenes was not idle isolation. It was an active cultivation of the soul. Their daily rhythms blended simplicity with discipline, and their teachings offered both a grounding in practical life and a connection to the unseen. In this environment, Mary's mind was shaped to value clarity, patience, and deep listening, qualities that would become essential when the weight of her calling finally arrived. Rituals were an integral part of her upbringing, not as hollow tradition, but as living practices designed to strengthen the body, focus the mind, and protect the spirit. She followed specific diets that were considered not only healthy but energetically pure, avoiding foods that could disrupt her physical or spiritual balance. Ritual baths cleansed more than just the body. They were symbolic acts of renewal, a reaffirmation of her readiness to remain in alignment with her purpose. Periods of silent meditation allowed her to withdraw from the noise of the world and connect with a higher source, anchoring her in a peace that would carry her through every challenge ahead. Her education was equally intentional. In an age when most women were denied access to formal learning, Mary was instructed in sacred texts and ancient prophecies. She absorbed not just the words, but the deeper meanings hidden within them, guided by teachers who recognized in her a mind capable of perceiving the layers beneath the literal. She studied the cycles of nature, the symbolic language of the stars, and the lineage of promises that had been handed down through centuries. This was not education for its own sake. It was preparation for a role that required both wisdom and spiritual stamina. The impact of these formative years was profound. They didn't simply prepare her for a single moment of destiny. They gave her the tools to sustain her calling over a lifetime. In the Essene way of life, every act was a form of service, every habit a building block in the architecture of the soul. For Mary, this meant that by the time her mission revealed itself fully, she was not only ready to accept it, but to embody it completely. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic, uncovering how these early disciplines and sacred studies created a foundation so strong that even the most extraordinary events of her life could not shake it. Write in the comments, preparation shapes destiny. Cayce described Mary's mind as something remarkable, not merely for her intelligence, but for the way it held memory, not just of her current life, but of impressions, lessons, and truths carried forward from lifetimes long past. This wasn't memory in the ordinary sense. It was a living archive, a deep well from which she could draw understanding far beyond her years. It explained why, even as a young girl, she could grasp the layered meanings of sacred texts or sense the unspoken weight behind certain rituals. The clarity she possessed was the result of accumulated wisdom, refined through experiences that spanned centuries, each life adding another thread to the intricate fabric of her soul. These threads were woven not only from study and discipline, but from the language of visions. Mary's path was marked by prophetic dreams, glimpses into what lay ahead, symbols that unfolded like maps guiding her steps. Sometimes these visions came as images of light, a child radiant with divine presence, or landscapes bathed in a stillness that spoke of eternity. Other times, they carried symbols whose meaning only became clear much later, revealing themselves at moments when decisions needed to be made. Such experiences didn't just affirm her faith, they strengthened her readiness, allowing her to walk forward with a calm certainty that she was moving in harmony with something far greater than herself. Cayce understood the power of this narrative, but he also recognized the delicacy of revealing it. For over a century, he held back certain details of what he had seen, choosing silence over sensationalism. It wasn't secrecy for the sake of mystery, it was protection. He believed that truth, if revealed before the collective mindset was prepared, could be twisted, diminished, or even rejected entirely. A premature revelation might fracture rather than unify faith, and so he recorded his visions in guarded ways, leaving them to be uncovered when the time was right. This decision itself speaks volumes about the nature of hidden truths. Sometimes the most transformative knowledge must wait for the right moment, the right audience, and the right openness of heart to receive it. Mary's story, as Cayce told it, was one of those truths, a story that could inspire a profound transformation in how we understand divine preparation, but only if approached with the reverence and depth it deserves. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic, tracing how the visions and memories that guided Mary's life were themselves part of a larger spiritual architecture, one designed not just to prepare her for the Messiah's arrival, but to protect the integrity of the mission from forces that would seek to distort it. Write in the comments, "Truth arrives in its own time." Cayce often spoke of symbols scattered across history, paintings, carvings, manuscripts, that, to most, seemed like simple artistic flourishes, but to those who knew, held a coded message. These symbols were left intentionally, almost like breadcrumbs through time, preserving Mary's true origin in plain sight. They appeared in temple frescoes, where a radiant woman stood beside a child encircled by light, in medieval manuscripts adorned with stars, suns, and flowing water, in geometric patterns woven into sacred cloths. Each image carried layers of meaning, veiling and revealing at the same time, ensuring that the truth was never completely lost, only awaiting the eyes and heart ready to see it. For Cayce, uncovering these symbols was not just an exercise in historical curiosity, it was an act of revelation. To understand them was to expand the scope of Christ's mission beyond the familiar boundaries of Scripture. It meant seeing that his arrival was not a singular event pulled from nowhere, but the culmination of a lineage, a prophecy, and a preparation as vast as humanity's own spiritual journey. Mary was the key to that understanding, the bridge between the divine intention and its earthly fulfillment. And when this perspective takes root, it changes the entire framework of faith, opening space for deeper unity between traditions that, on the surface, might seem worlds apart. Yet Cayce's purpose was never simply to inform. His revelations carried an invitation, a call to transformation that reached far beyond theology. Mary's life was a living demonstration that preparation for a divine purpose is not always immediate or obvious. It can span years, even lifetimes, shaped by moments that feel insignificant at the time but are, in truth, essential steps toward something greater. This idea carries a quiet but powerful challenge. If her path was so carefully woven, what hidden weaving might be shaping our own? In this light, the symbols left behind are not just about her, they are about us. They remind us that the divine plan operates both in the monumental and in the minute, in the grand designs of history, and in the small, unseen decisions we make every day. They urge us to live with awareness, to treat our own journey as something with depth, purpose, and connection to a larger whole. This mindset shifts how we see challenges, opportunities, and even delays, not as obstacles, but as part of the architecture of a mission we may not yet fully understand. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic, exploring how the recognition of these ancient signs and the mindset they inspire can transform the way we approach our own path, turning the ordinary into something extraordinary when seen through the lens of divine preparation. Write in the comments, "The signs are everywhere." If you've stayed with me all the way to this point, you already know how much depth and meaning is hidden behind stories we thought we understood. That's the kind of journey we take here, peeling back layers, connecting dots, and finding the threads that make the past feel alive again. So, if you want to keep walking this path with me, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss the next time we dive into something just as revealing. And tell me in the comments, I'm with you until the end, so I know you were here for every moment of this story. If this conversation resonated with you, give it a like. It's a simple way of keeping this exchange alive between us. There's a video right here that complements this topic beautifully. Click and continue with me over there.